there is a temptation or a desire for people to be the greatest. We have the story of Jesus and his disciples arguing, we are told, along the way about who among them was the greatest. And it's kind of an interesting dynamic because clearly that's what they were arguing about, but even in the depth of their being, they apparently realized that there was a flaw in that thinking, that there was something that wasn't particularly honorable about it because they were silent when Jesus confronted them about it. So it's kind of like kids when they get caught doing this, or any of us that get caught doing something that we're maybe not supposed to do, and we just kind of know that inside. And so the thing that we normally do is we go to silence because we don't really have an answer for it. And that's just kind of a reality of life. We strive to be the greatest, and yet the reality is there's more to life than that. And in fact, if the entire emphasis we have is on being the greatest, what does that mean for everybody else? And where do they fit into that picture? And of course, the reality is we can't all be the greatest, right? It's a logical impossibility. In our passages today, we are wrestling with this reality that we can't all be the greatest. Or the theme that I came up with was, you may not be the greatest, but you can have the greatest opportunity. You may not be the greatest, but you can have the greatest opportunity. And Jesus, of course, was trying to make this clear to the disciples when he says, if you want to be great, it has to do with being last. It has to do with being a servant. And of course, that's not always the exact words that we want to hear, and yet there is a tremendous power and opportunity in that message. Now, if we swing back to that Old Testament lesson today, which I just love, it's just one of my favorites, because it reveals so much about what humans are like. It reveals so much about what leaders are often like, and it also reflects so much what even God is like in that lesson. And so it comes in an early book of the Bible, and I actually messed this up at the first service. I was all embarrassed. We start the Bible with Genesis, then Exodus, then Leviticus, and then Numbers. So this comes out of the fourth book of the Bible. I said the third book of the Bible at the first service, so I'm getting really right today. But at any rate, in this fourth book, we've got the story, and you know the context, I believe. It's a time after Moses has led the Israelites out of Egypt, and now they're in this wandering time in their life. They're learning to depend on God and to put their trust in God and not to place so much emphasis on themselves. And they've come to a point where they've gotten a bit on the hungry side because the traditional foods that they're used to getting do not seem to be prevalent, and they're concerned that they've left the land of plenty, even though it was a harsh and horrible land. But now they're in this new land, and it's not as plenteous as they had hoped, and God provides for them food from heaven called manna. And so some of you know it's this white flaky substance that we don't have anything around it like it today. But this apparently was enough to feed them. And so they would get a new helping of this every morning that would last them through the day, and the next day they'd repeat the cycle. And I know a lot of you really, really enjoy eating the exact same food every day, right? So I have to admit, I sympathize with these folks a little bit here. Who wouldn't get tired of the same thing? You'd think food from God would be so incredible, but even that apparently wasn't enough to really keep them happy. And so here's where things get interesting. We get a glimpse into what it was like to be human back then. And Daryl did a wonderful job reading this, but I'd like to read it, as I think maybe I even have before, with just a little bit different tone, because you were very mature in how you read that, very mature. But I'm not sure if it was delivered originally quite so maturely. I think it had a little bit more of a whine to it. Have you ever heard a whiny voice before? Yeah. So what ends up happening is these Israelites start reflecting back and they begin to wish they had a little meat. And so that they say, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we used to eat in Egypt for nothing. The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. But now our strength is dried up. There's nothing at all but this manna to look at. How's that sound? Nice and whiny. Nice and whiny. Okay? What I love about this passage is, though it presents them as whiny, how many of you have ever had leadership responsibility in any way? You've got a parent, you've had other in work or sports or school or whatnot. The thing is, when we're leaders, we realize that sometimes others will complain. But if they complain enough, it's contagious. And so then we turn into complainers. We don't complain about the same thing. We complain about them. So here we get an insight into Moses. We find out Moses hears them. We hear the Lord is angry about it. Moses himself is displeased, it reads. And then Moses does his own little whining, talking to God. Why have you treated your servant so badly? Why have I not found favor in your sight that you lay the burden of all this people on me? Did I conceive all these people? I love that line. That's a great one. Did I give birth to them? He turns himself into a woman on this thing. So he is whining big time. All right? It's a contagious thing. And the lovely part about all this is when it's all said and done, we have a God who provides. Because we have a God who takes some of the Spirit and invites Moses to take a look around at the people that God has placed around him and says, can you find 70 of them that you can gather together? And so he does that, and God takes a measure of Spirit and puts it on those 70. And they speak a word of reason and hope to the people. And then God also, and this is where the humor of God comes in, God also even gives them what they ask for. They ask for meat. And God, this is where God's got a little devilishness in God. Here, listen to this. You've got to find it. Therefore, the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall eat, not only one day, or 2 days, or 5 days, or 10 days, or 20 days, but for a whole month. I love this part. Until it comes out your nostrils. Isn't that great? Until it comes out your nostrils. But ultimately, God provides. And Moses discovers that though he struggles to be the greatest himself, he has the greatest opportunity right in front of him to be part of God's mighty work. And so do all the people. And what's interesting is the Spirit that rests on those 70, that's contagious too. In fact, there's 2 people we read in that lesson. It's in your bulletin. Eldad and Medad. Those are exciting names. But at any rate, those 2 people are not part of the 70, and they receive the Spirit too. And they too speak a word of hope and restoration. We may not be the greatest, but we really do, on a regular basis, whoever we are, have the greatest of opportunities. In our homes, in our families, in our workplaces, in our place of learning, in our church, you name it. There in our nation, in our world, the greatest of opportunities continually are before us, but they are often in the form of service. And Jesus himself, when explaining this to the disciples, is not one just to do as I say, not as I do. No, Jesus does as he says. And he himself will become, in fact, the ultimate demonstration of servanthood. He will serve while he is living, and he will serve through death, and of course, ultimately come out the other side. And so all of us, that's how God works, all of us have reason for hope in this world. We do not have to clamor to try to get to the top of whatever ladder that we might be looking at. It's good to give our all, but our all is in the form of service. The greatest of opportunities is what we are to take advantage of, not the opportunity to try to be the greatest. It's a subtle difference between the two, but it's all the difference in the world. And so today, and I know some of you think we have communion too often. And you might think it feels like we have it so often it's about ready to come out our nostrils. But you know what? It's the food of God. It's the food of plenty. And it is, by the grace of Christ, the food of life. Let us receive it with joy, and let us take advantage of every opportunity the Lord puts in our way.